Imagine, for a moment, that you are sitting alone in a room. The lights are off, the world outside has gone quiet, and the only sound you hear is your own breathing. Suddenly, a whisper brushes past your ear, soft, fleeting, and impossible to place. You know you are alone, and yet, you are not. For as long as humanity has existed, we have feared what we cannot see. Shadows at the edge of firelight. Footsteps on a silent road. The sensation of eyes watching from the dark. These are not just fears born of imagination, they are patterns that echo across cultures, continents, and centuries. Tonight, we step into those patterns. This is not a collection of campfire tales. These are stories documented, retold, and passed down, drawn from people who swore on their lives that what they experienced was real. Doctors, soldiers, parents, children, everyday people who walked into the unknown and emerged forever changed. But before we dive into specific hauntings, we must ask, what makes a ghost story different from a nightmare? Nightmares vanish when the dreamer wakes, but a ghost story follows you into the daylight. The fear lingers, as if reality itself has been poisoned by something unseen. Consider the story of a man in Japan who rented a small apartment in Tokyo. By day, it was ordinary, plain walls, a bed, a desk, nothing unusual. But at night, he began to notice sounds, light taps on the ceiling, then whispers too faint to decipher. He tried to dismiss them as neighbors or perhaps the building settling. Yet one night, when he placed his ear to the wall, the whispers grew louder, as if dozens of voices were speaking directly inside his skull. The man fled the apartment in terror, leaving his belongings behind. When questioned, the landlord only shook his head. "You're not the first to leave," he said. "No one stays there for long." Now, was this an overactive mind? Sleep deprivation? Or was it something else, something tied to the place itself? That is the unsettling thing about real ghost stories. There are no easy answers. Across the world, whispers in the dark take many forms. In Ireland, they are called the voices of the banshee, warnings of death, carried on the wind. In parts of Africa, they are believed to be the ancestors, calling out to remind the living of their obligations. In the Philippines, it is said that if you hear your name whispered in the night, you must never answer, for it may not be the living who calls. But perhaps the most disturbing detail of all is this: so many of these whispers say the same things. "Come here. I'm waiting. Don't look." Simple, chilling commands that carry no logic, no meaning, only dread. And here is where psychology plays its part. The human brain is hardwired to seek patterns, to make sense of random sounds. But what happens when those sounds form words, words that should not exist in the silence? Is it your mind playing tricks, or is it the universe revealing something it was never meant to? One case from England in the early 1900s tells of a family who lived in a countryside cottage. At night, the children swore they heard whispers coming from the fireplace. At first, their parents dismissed it as childish fancy. But one evening, as the mother sat awake knitting by the fire, she froze. A voice came from inside the chimney. Low, rasping, but unmistakable. It said, "I'm cold." They left the house within days. You see, whispers are more than just sound, they are an intrusion. A violation of the safe boundary between here and elsewhere. To hear a voice in the dark, when no one is there, is to know beyond doubt that you are not alone. And once you accept that possibility, the world itself becomes unstable. Because if voices can come from nowhere, what else can? And that is where our journey truly begins. The whispers are only the beginning. Around the world, spirits do not just call out from the shadows, they reveal themselves in shapes, in forms, in tragedies written across centuries. Some are sorrowful. Some are vengeful. But all of them are unforgettable. Next, we turn to one of the most enduring figures of all, the spectral woman in white. A figure who wanders riversides, lonely roads, and forgotten halls. She is seen in Mexico, in France, in the United States. Always dressed in white. Always mourning. Always searching for what she has lost. But who is she? Why does she appear everywhere? And what does she want from those unlucky enough to meet her gaze? The answers are more terrifying than you may think. She is one of the most universal, ghostly figures in existence. A pale woman, draped in white, wandering through the night with an expression of endless sorrow or bottomless rage. Her presence is reported across continents, as though she is not one spirit, but many. Yet wherever she appears, she is bound to tragedy, betrayal, and loss. Perhaps the most famous incarnation is La Llorona, the weeping woman of Mexico. Her story is told in hushed tones to children, warning them never to wander near rivers at night. The tale begins with Maria, a woman said to be breathtakingly beautiful. She married a wealthy man and bore his children, but over time, he grew distant, taking comfort in the arms of another. Consumed by despair and jealousy, Maria did the unthinkable. In a moment of madness, she drowned her children in the river. When she realized what she had done, she screamed, tearing at her clothes in horror, before throwing herself into the water to follow them. But death brought her no peace. Condemned for her sin, her spirit was cursed to walk the earth for eternity, crying, weeping, searching for her children. Her ghostly wails, it is said, bring death to anyone who hears them. Even today, people claim to hear her sobbing by riversides, crying out, mis hijos, oh, my children. And yet, La Llorona is not unique to Mexico. Versions of the woman in white exist everywhere. In the United States, she appears on lonely highways, where drivers see a pale woman on the roadside, dressed like a bride. When they stop to help, she vanishes into thin air or worse, appears in the back seat of the car, silent and staring. In the Philippines, there is the story of the White Lady of Balit Drive, a ghost said to haunt a narrow, tree-lined road in Manila. Drivers describe seeing a young woman in a long white dress, her face obscured by hair. If you pass her without offering a ride, your car may stall, your tires may blow out, or you may see her sitting silently in the back seat. Some say she was a woman betrayed and murdered by her lover. Others believe she was a victim of assault, left for dead along the road. Whoever she was, her rage lingers still. Europe has its own share of weeping brides and pale apparitions. In France, stories tell of women in white haunting old castles, spirits of those murdered by jealous husbands or abandoned lovers. In the United Kingdom, entire families claim to have seen spectral brides gliding down staircases, their faces etched in sadness, their presence tied to family curses. But what is it about the color white? Why does this spectral figure appear clothed in bridal gowns, funeral shrouds, or simple flowing dresses? White, across cultures, is the color of death, mourning, and purity. It is the shade of both weddings and burials, of beginnings and endings. When a ghost appears in white, it becomes a living contradiction, both innocent and corrupted, both bride and corpse. Psychologists argue that the woman in white may represent humanity's deepest fears, the betrayal of love, the corruption of innocence, the tragedy of motherhood lost. But for those who have seen her, no explanation can erase the terror. Take the story of a man in New Mexico who was driving late at night along a rural road. He spotted a woman standing by the roadside, her white dress glowing faintly under the headlights. Believing she was in trouble, he slowed down, rolled down his window, and asked if she needed help. She turned to face him. Her eyes were hollow sockets. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide. By the time he hit the gas, she had already vanished. Whether she mourns, whether she waits, or whether she hunts, one thing remains clear: the woman in white never comes without reason. She is always searching for something, or someone. And if you should encounter her, perhaps the real question is not who she is, but why she has chosen you. Because sometimes, the woman in white does not vanish when you pass her. Sometimes, she follows you home. And if homes themselves can be haunted, if walls can trap the suffering of the dead, then what happens when you step inside a place that breathes with darkness? Next, we enter the most dreaded territory of all, the cursed house. A place so alive with death that those who enter rarely stay. A home is supposed to be a place of safety. Walls to keep the outside world at bay. A roof to shield us from storms. A place where families are built, where life unfolds in quiet repetition. Yet some houses betray this promise. Instead of protecting, they watch. Instead of comforting, they devour. All over the world, there are stories of homes that seem alive, not in warmth, but in menace. They breathe with sighs in the night. Their walls groan not from age, but from anguish. The air inside feels heavy, charged, as though something unseen resents your presence. These are not simply haunted houses. They are traps. Take, for instance, the chilling case of the Amityville house in New York. In 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered his parents and 4 siblings as they slept, claiming later that voices urged him to kill. A year later, George and Kathy Lutz bought the house, moving in with their children. They lasted only 28 days. During that time, they reported swarms of flies in the dead of winter. Green slime oozing from the walls. A room that remained freezing no matter how many fires were lit. George claimed to wake every night at exactly 3:15 a.m., the same time the murders occurred. One night, Kathy woke screaming, her body marked with scratches that resembled claw marks. Another night, they said their 5-year-old daughter spoke of playing with an invisible friend, a pig-faced creature she called Jody. They fled in terror, abandoning their belongings. To this day, visitors claim to feel a crushing dread when approaching the property, though skeptics insist it was all a hoax. But whether you believe the Lutz family or not, the reputation of that house remains. Yet America is not alone in such stories. In Japan, tales of the Akigahara forest, sometimes called the Sea of Trees, describe not only restless spirits but homes built near its edges that become saturated with grief. Those who stay in these houses often report phantom footsteps pacing at night, doors slamming, and whispers calling from the dense forest. Some say the walls of those homes seem to sweat as though absorbing the sorrow of countless lives lost nearby. In Scotland, there is the infamous Boleskine House, once owned by occultist Aleister Crowley. The house was rumored to be cursed long before he lived there. Locals spoke of strange fires, accidents, and suicides linked to the property. Visitors described hearing growls in empty rooms and seeing shadowy figures peering from windows, even when no one was inside. After Crowley attempted rituals within its walls, the disturbances intensified. Doors slammed violently, unseen hands tugged at clothes, and disembodied voices echoed through the halls. Musicians who later bought the property fled, leaving it to burn in multiple mysterious blazes. But perhaps the most chilling detail of all is this: some houses are not haunted because of what happened inside them. They are haunted because of what the land itself remembers. A family in rural Australia moved into a new home, built fresh on land that had once been an indigenous burial ground. At first, everything was normal. But soon, the children spoke of a tall, skeletal figure that stood at the edge of their rooms at night. The parents dismissed it as imagination until they, too, began waking at night to the sound of breathing. Deep, ragged, animal-like breaths coming from within the walls. One night, the father pressed his ear to the plaster. The breathing was there, steady, unmistakable. As if the house itself was alive. They left within weeks, never returning. Psychologists will argue that houses like these prey upon the human mind, creaks, drafts, and old pipes fueling paranoia. But what if it's more than that? What if some walls truly remember? Stone, wood, and earth are not lifeless. They absorb laughter, screams, blood, grief. They hold on to energy, replaying it, like grooves etched into a record. And when that record spins, the living are forced to hear the song of the dead. If walls can trap memories, if floors can echo footsteps long after the walker is gone, then perhaps these haunted homes are not anomalies. Perhaps they are warnings. Because when a house breathes, it does not simply shelter you. It consumes you. And yet, hauntings are not confined to bedrooms or fireplaces. They linger in places touched by unimaginable loss, where hundreds, sometimes thousands, perished at once. Fields, ruins, disaster sites, and battlefields where soldiers still march long after death. These are the ghosts born of tragedy. And their stories are even darker. There are places in this world where the air itself feels heavy, as though it remembers. Fields where blood once ran like rivers. Ruins where screams still echo in the silence. In these places, the dead do not rest quietly, they linger, walking alongside the living, reminding us that some wounds never heal. One of the most famous examples lies in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the site of the bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. Over 50,000 men were killed, wounded, or went missing in just 3 days. Locals still speak of ghostly soldiers wandering the fields at dusk. Visitors report hearing the thunder of cannons and the crack of rifles long after the guns themselves fell silent. Some have even photographed figures in Union and Confederate uniforms, men who vanish when approached. There is a story of a group of Civil War reenactors who, while preparing for a staged skirmish, saw a column of soldiers marching toward them. The men were ragged, bloody, and silent. At first, the reenactors thought it was another troop of performers, but when they tried to wave them over, the soldiers simply dissolved into the mist. Across the ocean, in Hiroshima, Japan, survivors tell of spirits seen wandering the city streets in the aftermath of the atomic bombing. Witnesses describe figures with burned skin, staggering silently, arms outstretched as if still searching for water. Some say the spirits rise each year on the anniversary of the blast, drawn back to the place where their lives ended in fire. The ruins of the atomic dome, left standing in remembrance, have become a hotspot for ghostly sightings, especially at night, when shadows flicker in windows that should be empty. And it is not just battlefields or bomb sites. Disasters, too, seem to create echoes that cannot be silenced. Consider the tragedy of the Titanic. More than 1,500 souls lost to the freezing Atlantic. To this day, crew members on museum ships report hearing phantom cries and footsteps. Some say the spirits of the drowned linger in artifacts salvaged from the wrecked jewelry, clothing, even pieces of the ship itself. One exhibit curator swore that a mannequin dressed in recovered garments would be found each morning in a different position, as though someone or something had adjusted it overnight. Closer to modern times, in New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina devastated the city, residents spoke of shadowy figures seen in the floodwaters. People heard voices calling out names in the night, begging for rescue. Some of these voices came from areas where no survivors had been found, only the dead. What ties all these hauntings together is the sheer scale of suffering. When death comes suddenly, violently, and in great numbers, it leaves behind more than ruins. It leaves scars on the very fabric of reality. Psychologists suggest it is the human mind imposing order on chaos, projecting grief and guilt into visions. But those who have been there swear otherwise. Take the chilling story of a British soldier stationed in Belgium during World War I. While on night patrol near Ypres, he claimed to see a fellow soldier standing guard, his uniform torn, face pale in the moonlight. The soldier saluted him before walking into the trees. Hours later, when the soldier reported the encounter, his commanding officer grew pale. The man he described had been killed in action 2 weeks earlier. These encounters blur the line between memory and manifestation. Are they ghosts? Residual energy replaying itself? Or are they something more, souls trapped by the violence of their deaths, unable to move on? The unsettling truth is this: when death comes in tragedy, the living may rebuild, but the dead often remain. They walk among us, reminders of horror that cannot be forgotten. And sometimes, they are not content to simply wander. Sometimes, they cling to the living, demanding recognition, feeding on fear, embedding themselves so deeply that escape seems impossible. Which brings us to the most disturbing kind of haunting of all, not spirits tied to places, but spirits tied to people. Hauntings that do not vanish when you leave the battlefield, the ruins, or the cursed house. Hauntings that follow you home, crawl into your dreams, and take hold of your very body. The possessions. And those stories will make you question where the ghost ends, and where you begin. It is one thing to see a shadow in a hallway, to hear a voice in the night, to catch a glimpse of a figure fading into mist. Those hauntings may shake us, but we can always tell ourselves it was outside of us, something in the room, something in the house, something in the world beyond our body. But what happens when the haunting does not stay outside? When it does not whisper from the shadows or pace behind closed doors? What happens when it crawls inside you, when the ghost does not haunt the house, but the soul? Possession is one of the oldest and most terrifying ideas in human history. Nearly every culture speaks of it: spirits, demons, or restless dead forcing themselves into the bodies of the living. Ancient Sumerians believed illnesses were caused by malevolent spirits taking control. In Christianity, possession became the work of the devil and his legion. In Africa, Possession could mean the spirits of ancestors speaking through the living. In all of them, one detail remains constant: possession strips away your humanity, making you a puppet for something that should not exist. Take the infamous case of Anneliese Michel in 1970s Germany. A young woman, devout and intelligent, she began suffering seizures as a teenager. Doctors diagnosed epilepsy and depression. Yet as the years went on, her behavior grew darker. She claimed to see demonic faces in the walls. She heard voices mocking her, commanding her to hurt herself. Food and water disgusted her. Religious objects burned her skin. Priests were eventually called, and over the course of 10 months, they performed 67 exorcisms. Witnesses said her voice changed, at times deep and guttural, at times shrieking in languages she had never learned. She claimed to be possessed not by one spirit, but many, including Judas, Cain, and even Lucifer himself. By the time it was over, Anneliese was dead. She had starved, her body ravaged. Skeptics call it a tragic case of untreated illness, religious hysteria fueled by mental decline. But those who heard the recordings of her exorcisms, the unnatural growls, the voices overlapping, the strength that seemed beyond human, believe something darker was at play. And she is not alone. In the Philippines, a young girl named Clarita Villanueva in 1953 claimed she was attacked by invisible entities while imprisoned. Witnesses saw bite marks appear on her skin in real time, teeth sinking into her flesh though no one touched her. Doctors, police, and reporters watched in horror as she screamed, clawing at her own body. She claimed the spirits wanted her soul. The marks would fade, only to return moments later. To this day, no medical explanation exists. But possession does not always end in death or destruction. In Haiti and across the Caribbean, in the practice of voodoo, possession is seen as a form of communication, spirits riding the living to deliver messages, guidance, and warnings. Yet even in these traditions, there is an unspoken fear. What if the wrong spirit enters? What if what rides you is not an ancestor, but something malevolent masquerading as one? The psychology of possession is complex. Some argue it is the ultimate expression of trauma, an individual so overwhelmed that their mind creates another to hold their pain. But then there are the cases that defy reason. Children speaking in dead languages. Objects flying across rooms during exorcisms. Voices emerging from throats that cannot physically produce them. And perhaps the most disturbing part is this: possession is not limited to the devout, the weak, or the innocent. It can happen to anyone. All it takes is a moment of vulnerability, a brush with death, a cursed object brought home, a night spent in a place where the veil is thin. You might laugh, scoff, dismiss it as folklore. But those who have seen the light leave a loved one's eyes, replaced by something cold and alien, never laugh again. Because if a ghost can enter you, how can you ever be sure you are still yourself? And if there are spirits that seek to control, to inhabit, to consume, then there are others who do not hide behind masks of grief or rage. They appear openly, not in faces or forms we know, but as shadows that stalk humanity across cultures, across centuries. Dark figures that slip into bedrooms at night. That stand at the foot of your bed, faceless, silent, waiting. Next, we turn to them. The ones known only as the shadow people. It begins the same way for almost everyone. You wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, unable to move. Your chest feels heavy, your breath shallow. In the corner of the room, you see it, tall, faceless, a silhouette darker than the darkness itself. It does not move, and yet you feel it watching. These are the shadow people, a phenomenon reported across continents, across centuries, always described in nearly identical ways. A dark, human-like figure, featureless, sometimes wearing a hat, sometimes with glowing red or yellow eyes, but most often, a simple, inky silhouette. They appear in bedrooms, on roadsides, in abandoned buildings. They do not speak. They do not breathe. They simply stand and watch. One of the earliest references comes from ancient folklore. In Islamic tradition, beings called jinn can appear as shadows, moving silently, lurking in corners of homes. In Native American stories, shadow spirits are omens of death, believed to feed on fear and sickness. In Europe, they were often dismissed as night demons, explanations for sleep paralysis. Yet the descriptions never change: humanoid, faceless, oppressive. Modern psychology offers one explanation: sleep paralysis. In this state, the body is frozen between sleep and waking, often accompanied by hallucinations. The brain creates a figure to match the sensation of being watched, and thus the shadow appears. A scientific answer. But then comes the troubling question: why do people across the world see the exact same thing? Consider the case of Heidi, a 6-year-old girl from Georgia in the 1980s. Her parents noticed she often spoke to invisible friends, which at first seemed harmless. But one night, she woke screaming, pointing at the corner of her room. She described a dark man with no face, wearing a hat. Her parents dismissed it as imagination until her father saw it too, standing at the foot of their bed. Another chilling account comes from an officer in Arizona who was driving alone late at night. He spotted what he thought was a pedestrian on the side of the road. But when his headlights hit it, the figure cast no shadow on the pavement. Instead, it seemed to absorb the light, its edges blurry, its form unreal. As he slowed to look closer, it vanished, leaving only the empty desert road. Some encounters go further. Victims report not just being watched, but physically attacked. A woman in Canada described being pinned to her bed by a shadow figure, unable to scream as it pressed down on her chest. When she finally managed to move, her arms bore bruises shaped like long, thin fingers. Others claim to wake with scratches, burns, or a lingering sense of dread that follows them for days. Researchers of the paranormal have theories. Some say shadow people are not ghosts at all, but interdimensional beings, creatures slipping accidentally into our reality. Others claim they are harbingers, omens of death or misfortune. Still others whisper they are not separate beings, but manifestations of the human soul itself, fractured and taking form in the darkness. And then, there is the most unsettling possibility, that shadow people are not merely watching. They are waiting. Waiting for what? No one knows. But the consistency of the reports, the thousands of testimonies across cultures and time, suggest something more than simple hallucination. If ghosts are the echoes of the dead, and possessions are the intrusion of spirits, then shadow people are something stranger, something that does not fit into any category we know. And that brings us to the final and most terrifying question. What happens when the dead refuse to rest? When shadows, spirits, and whispers cannot be explained, dismissed, or escaped? These are the unsolved mysteries of the paranormal. Stories that refuse to die, that linger like the shadows themselves. Stories that leave us not with answers, but with chilling silence. For every haunting that can be dismissed as imagination, for every possession attributed to illness, there remain those stories that defy explanation. Cases documented, investigated, and debated yet never resolved. These are not merely tales to frighten children. These are mysteries that linger in the archives of history, unanswered, unforgotten. Take the Enfield poltergeist in London, 1977. A quiet suburban home became the center of chaos when the Hodgson family reported strange disturbances. Furniture moved on its own. Toys were hurled across rooms. Knocks echoed from the walls at night. Most disturbing of all, Janet, an 11-year-old girl, appeared to be the focus of the activity. Witnesses, including journalists and police officers, claimed they saw her levitate, thrown against walls by unseen hands. Her voice would change, deepening into that of an old man who identified himself as Bill. Skeptics called it trickery, but tapes of her voice, photographs of her levitation, and the sheer number of witnesses keep the case alive to this day. Or consider the SS Aurang Medan, a ghost ship said to have been found adrift in the 1940s. When rescuers boarded, they discovered the entire crew dead, their bodies frozen in terror, mouths open in silent screams, eyes staring skyward. No injuries, no explanation, only the overwhelming sense that something unnatural had occurred. Before the ship could be towed back to port, it mysteriously exploded and sank, taking its secrets with it. What did those sailors see in their final moments? What horror struck them so deeply it killed them where they stood? Then there are the countless stories of phantom hitchhikers. In the United States, a man driving late at night picks up a young woman in white, silent and pale. She asks for a ride home. When he arrives at the address, she is gone. When he knocks on the door, the family tells him their daughter died years before. Versions of this tale exist in South Africa, in Russia, in Brazil, always the same, always unresolved. Are these restless spirits replaying their last journeys? Or do they appear to remind us of something we cannot yet comprehend? Even modern technology cannot escape the unexplained. In 2014, a family in Scotland reported disturbances so severe that police were called. Officers themselves claimed to see objects flying across the room, lights flickering, and furniture overturning with no one near. A senior officer stated publicly that he had no rational explanation for what he saw. The official police report remains on file. What makes these stories so chilling is not just the fear they inspire, but the silence that follows them. They leave us with no resolution, no answers, only questions. And perhaps that is the true horror. That after centuries of belief, thousands of witnesses, recordings, photographs, testimonies, we still do not know what ghosts truly are. Are they the dead, trapped between worlds? Are they fragments of memory, playing endlessly like broken records? Are they something darker, something alien, wearing familiar forms to torment us? One thing is certain, those who have seen cannot forget. The soldier who saluted a phantom comrade. The mother who heard her name whispered from the fireplace. The driver who found an empty seat where a hitchhiker had been. Their stories remain, etched into the fabric of our world, refusing to fade. And so, we are left with a haunting thought. If the dead truly walk among us, if shadows slip into our rooms at night, if whispers come from the walls themselves, then perhaps the boundary between the living and the dead is far thinner than we believe. Perhaps, even now, as you sit and listen to these stories in the safety of your room, you are not as alone as you think. Because the dead may refuse to rest. And they may already